Interesting you mentioned that. I tend to kind of live my life just being in the moment. I don't worry about age and hitting milestones and becoming an older guy, but I'm 52 and more increasingly I'm thinking about mortality and what's next and how much I'm going to miss this planet and what I need to do to get like and it's not any I'm not trying to be dire, but it's like I'm wondering if that's just like a natural evolution of the psychology of the brain to get to that point where you've been around long enough, you know all the factors and you just think about it. And I was just thinking, riffing off what you were saying.
100%. I mean, I didn't think about any of that until I turned like I'm 56.
Okay.
So when I turned 55 is actually when I turned 50 is when I started to think about it. And
Yeah,
then when I turned 55, I was like, how much time do I have left here?
that's
Like,
right.
do I have like 25 years? And out of that, how much time do I have where my body and my mind are operational? You know, I'm like, shit, I better get to work. I got
Yeah,
some shit to do.
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I saw a skit with Bill Burr. He was on the Tonight Show the other day, and
I
he
love
was
Bill Burr. He's
I
so funny.
I do too. And he was like, men have to hold it all in. We tamp it down. We operate differently. That's why men between the ages of like 51 to 61 drop dead. And he was like, when you can make it past that window, you should be in pretty good shape. But just the way, Bill, I mean, just the way he was explaining it, it was awesome. So
Oh
he's,
yeah, I love how he's like his accent is so strong, and then he's also so like just blunt and just straight up.
uh-huh, yeah, he gets right.
It's
Did you see Howie Mandel? He was on his podcast and he brought Billy Corgan in, and Billy Corgan,
no.
they're brothers. So Howie surprised them. I guess Bill Burr's dad and Billy Corgan's dad was like a player, had separate families, so they're like related. And when he walked in, Corgan walks in and he was like, Howie's like, "Hey, have you heard this story?" And Bill Burr just said, "You're an asshole." And he was like, "I'm not. I don't want to fucking talk about this." Like he was on the spot. And then they finally calmed down and he just kind of started talking. And they were like, yeah, they kind of brought their dads up. Bill wasn't happy. His body language was really bad the whole time. But I'm thinking since that time, they've probably talked. But yeah, Billy Corgan from the Pumpkins and Bill Burr are related.
That's some crazy shit.
Totally
Holy,
crazy. Yeah.
yeah, that's nuts, man.
So it's
God, I
wild.
love your background, dude. That is so cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a visual artist, so that's one of my original paintings.
Dude, that thing is dope.
Thank you. I appreciate
Yeah,
it. I
really
appreciate
cool.
it.
My son painted this Steve Jobs one.
I dig that. I really, really dig that. That's great.
Yeah, but I love yours. I freaking love it.
Well, do me a favor, and when we get off, if you don't mind sending me your address, I got some stickers and stuff with this that I'd love to send to you.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
that's totally cool. I would love that.
that'd be awesome. Well,
Yeah.
man, I love these rendezvous with guests that I've had before. So I'm so glad you reached out. I'm looking forward to getting into the startup cycle. So thank you so much for taking a minute out today.
Oh man, thank you. Thank you. That is so cool of you. I appreciate it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into the book. How did this book begin? How did the idea take steam and become what it is today?
Well, I mean, I'll go back to I left eBay Enterprise Marketing Solutions, or at that time it was called Pepper Jam, and I went to into politics, and I was trying to get Congress to move money down into startups, and they said no. And the one person I was talking to who represented the group said, the problem is that 90% of them fail. There's too much failure, so we're investing as much as we feel comfortable. So then I decided I'm going to go out and do a research project, right? So I went out and started a 5-year research project to understand founder failure and success, right? Like, why were they failing? When were they failing? How were they failing? What was going on? And so after 5 years of that, I had all this data. I went back, they turned me down again. So then I was like, I'm going to write a book about this.
Yeah.
And that is the origination of the book. It's just like I had all this data and all this insights from the data and sentiment and everything. And I was like, I got to share this with people that are starting companies so that they don't fall into the traps that the other people fell into. And the first one was that they didn't understand the life cycle. So the startup life cycle, the book, is to help people understand the life cycle of a startup, what it should be,
Yeah.
not what it is, but what it actually should be. Because what it is right now, people think that a stage in their business is based off of funding rounds. Like you're in pre-seed, but those are things that happen during the life cycle. They're not the life cycle itself, right? So, and that's because most of the founders are focused on they look at it the way that the investors tell them, and the investors are looking at it through their lens, right? So it's okay for the investors to say, "Oh, it's a pre-seed company, it's a seed company, it's a series seed company, it's a series A company," but those are three stages, but there's seven stages in a life cycle. You see
Yeah.
what I mean? So a practitioner and investor have different views of what a life cycle is.
You know what's interesting about this process? Because it's business fascinates me because I tend to come from a creative realm and even interviewing and hearing you talk with such a level of experience and acumen. My question before we needle into specifics of this startup cycle and helping people get here, how have you remained so positive and confident and getting over failures and being who you are today? Because I think that's huge for startups and people that are going into ventures like that. How have you done that, maintain that?
I see failure as a another word for progress. Um, if you think about it, even in nature, right? Evolution comes from failure. A species fails and a new species arrives. Plants that fail and new plants arrive. So evolution is a process of failure. So if you're starting a business and you're failing, you're really it's just another word for progress. You're just making progress. So, a lot of times the problem is a lot of times the investors see failure as failure, like the end of the road. But founders should see failure as a new start, right? Iterations are small changes that you do to different things that you're doing into the business, and a pivot, which is where you change your North Star, where you change where you're headed in the first place, right? Like those two things are different. And little iterations can equal a pivot because you're learning, right? You're learning on these little iterations. Then you go, holy crap, I need to change the direction here for whatever reason. So I see failure as another word for progress. And that's how I maintain optimism because I'm like, hey, good, I got that out of the way. I learned something. Let's move on.
There's key people in our lives that put these seeds into us that make us feel that way. Who did that for you? Who was the real person that made you believe this philosophy and live it?
I had a mentor, and when I was 19, and he used to, for a solid 6 months, he would put me on a bench in the sun across from a construction site. And it was hot and wearing a suit. The bus would stop all the time. It wasn't a nice neighborhood. And I'm sitting there every Tuesday and Wednesday for like an hour watching this yard across. I had no idea why I was there. And he said to me, he said, "Listen, at the end of it, so this went on for 6 months. I saw the hole get dug. I saw the foundation get poured. I saw the construction of the building, and then I saw eventually people moving in because they move in people as they build the building,
Yeah.
right? So at that point, he was like, "What did you learn?" And I said, "Well, I mean, I'll tell you, I was sitting in front of a sign that said coming soon for like, 3 weeks, kind of pissed off, right? Because I'm like sitting there, I'm on commission too, right? So I'm like, man, this is bullshit. And then he goes, well, what after that? And I said, well, it took forever. The foundation got built, and then the rest of it was really fast. Now people are moving in. And he's like, what'd you learn? And then I thought about it for a little while, and he sent me away. He said, what'd you learn? I started to answer. He said, don't answer. He's like, go away, come back to me and tell me what you actually learned. And what I realized when I look back on it is that the planning was the part of it that I was watching with the sign. Then the foundation was the taking the plan, the vision, and creating a blueprint, and then digging out the blueprint, doing the foundation of what happened. You spent a lot of time on the foundation,
Yeah.
and then the rest of the building went up pretty fast, and then people started moving in right away. So, in the process of watching this, this is like how a business is built, right? And in the process of watching this, I saw the construction workers dealing with problems. These are these little iterations. These are little failures the whole time. You'd see something break or something fall, or you'd hear some guy dropping the F-bomb all over the place because something didn't work out right. Or the products. I got to know these guys because I was across the street. So I would like talk to them and stuff. And sometimes I had lunch with them. And they told me about all the problems they face. And I was like, so this is a building that was planned for months and architects and this is a big like a 10-story building. So a lot of people were involved in this, yet they still had problems that they didn't see.
Yeah.
They dealt with those problems and they moved on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was my first lesson in this way of thinking.
It almost reminds me of like Mr. Miyagi, what he was doing with Ralph with the Karate Kid. All of those little things. The whole preparation. It didn't really relate to fighting, but it did. It taught you patience and being observant. And I think about it this way. Having jazz radio, I interview people, and I always love talking to people that knew Miles Davis. Obviously, he was like the icon. He was the one. And there's so many
Yeah.
interesting stories because he was such a dynamic cat. And they always say that he listened well. And the reason why I bring that into it when it comes up with startups and business minds is that you have to hone in on these little skills. Like your mentor taught you how to be observant, how to pick all the pieces apart because it's an entire organism that you have to analyze if you want to do good at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have to look at, if you think about it, businesses have four functional areas or should have four functional areas. And those functional areas tied to valuation drivers, right? So you have shared services. This is like operations, IT, legal, all that stuff. They're responsible for margin, right? And then you have sales and marketing. They're responsible for growth. And then you have shared services or service delivery that's responsible for retention. Growth, margin, and retention are the things that drive value in a business, right? Well, if you look at the construction, you have the same sort of setup. You have people that are on the front end building things and people that come behind them, right? And do other things. And there's a stack. So businesses and most things in life, I find this pattern of a stack. It's like a waterfall. You have one thing that leads into another, and there's these little pools. And when it's filled, it moves into the next pool,
Yeah.
right? So if you think about that with business, you have your sales and marketing, which drives when they're closed into sales or into service, sorry.
Yeah.
And then from service, operations takes over and maintains things, right? So you have that waterfall. Well, in the construction, when I watched these guys, saw a similar waterfall. You have the people that dig the ditches, you have the people that pour the concrete, you have the people that build the building, and then you have the people that do the finish work. And then you have the salespeople at the end who fill in. So these waterfalls are present all over the place, right? If you pay attention to what they are, then as a founder, you know the two things you need to know, which is where you are and where you're going, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So the thing that's interesting about this startup life cycle is that it's like parenting. You can never be too prepared. And when I talk to coaches and look at the culture of coaching and helping businesses, there's so many things that business people think they know, they have figured out, but they don't. And that's when you come in with your book and your expertise. Why is that? Why is there such a large chasm?
I think overconfidence. There's two things with founders, right? It's really interesting because they're opposite. There's underconfidence and overconfidence, and they're at the same time,
Yeah.
not on the same subjects, but the same time, right? So you have one founder who's like underconfident, and then you have on maybe their vision they're overconfident,
Yeah.
and then in a certain product they're underconfident, or they're overconfident with their ability to build a business, but underconfident with their ability to raise capital to fund the business. So I run into both, and most of the time I run into when there's overconfidence, I run into arrogance. To
Yeah.
your point, this is where they're like, "Yeah, I know this." There's nothing that turns off an investor more than a founder that says, I know, right? Like,
Yeah.
I know all the time. I know. No, you don't.
Yeah.
You don't know unless you've been there,
Yeah.
right? Like, you think you know, but you don't know until you've actually been there. It's one thing to study about riding bicycles and to watch people ride bikes and do all this. It's a whole nother thing to get on a bicycle and ride it.
Yeah. Yeah. It certainly is. What about imposter syndrome? How does that factor into it? Because there's all these egos, there's all these dreams, then you have these big figures that exist in the world that you aspire to. How much does imposter syndrome weave into it?
You're a great interviewer, by the way.
Oh,
These are great questions.
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really fan. I mean, I've done, I don't know, 300 podcasts. This is a fantastic interview.
Oh, thank you.
Um, yeah, mad credits to you.
Thank you.
In addition to your epic background. Yeah, so I would say that, I think every founder I've ever met, including myself, I've done 12 startups, right? I've won 4 private equity awards. I mean, I wrote a book on it, right? I still have imposter syndrome.
Yeah,
So I think from any founder, imposter syndrome is there, and honestly, I think it's healthy
yeah,
because it humbles you up,
yeah,
right? If you don't have imposter syndrome, then chances are you're going to be arrogant. If you're arrogant, you're going to be overconfident, and then you're going to fail.
yeah,
You
for
know,
sure.
yeah. So when people are have imposter syndrome, I'm always like, hey, it's not a bad thing. It's healthy.
Yeah,
It's fine as long as you don't let it choke you,
yeah,
right? It's fine.
yeah, for sure. In the world of startups, we're looking at Steve Jobs, and I remember this interview before. Like every time I'm thinking about something, like Steve's looking at me, like, "What are you going to do? What do you got?" And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, in the world of startups, there's all these miraculous stories. It's like sports. There's just we love this kind of phoenix rising, or this moment where people get it and they have this behemoth like Jeff Bezos and whatnot. But in your estimation, maybe a startup we don't know about, what has been one of the best startups that you've seen that has been inspiring to you as a guy that's done startups?
I think that, the first thing is that, I talk to a lot of founders when I'm looking at deal flow from an investor perspective. And they'll be like, we're going to be a 1 billion-dollar company. We're going to be a unicorn. Well, 1/10 of 1%, so a basis point of people that are out there going after to be a unicorn actually become a unicorn. So I always tell them, I'm like, listen, that's like telling your parents you're going to be a movie star or a rock star. I mean, come on, right? Like it's
Yeah,
so rare. It's so rare. If you strive for it, most of the ones that do strive for it, they actually go out of business because they become overvalued
yeah,
and the investors can't fund them because there's not enough margin in the deal. So that's one piece, right, that I look at is I'm not looking at these unicorns
yeah,
because they're too rare. And most of the time, what happens is they either hit a tailwind, meaning it's like they're standing on the ocean. You know, when you're standing on the ocean and a wave hits you and pushes you forward,
uh-huh,
it's like that, right? Sometimes they have that tailwind and it's good luck.
yeah,
They just hit the jackpot at the right time. I mean, timing is critical, right? So hit the time, pushes them on the shore, and I call those like one hit wonders,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
They hit something big. Maybe it's not they didn't do a really good job. They were backed by a whole bunch of money. They had a tailwind. They were, first to market or even second to market or third to market, and they had this strategic advantage. So I look for companies that are actually run really clean,
yeah,
like really well run companies across multiple different spectrums, and I put them into categories. So in the CPG category, consumer goods, Costco is amazing.
yeah,
I mean, like if you watch, they pay their people well, they have incredible margins. It's run beautifully if you walk around. If you look at fast food, I don't know if you've heard of In-N-Out Burger.
oh, one of
I
my
mean,
favorites.
you look at In-N-Out Burger. I used to bring people there and watch them because they're wearing white in a burger joint, right? They pay $20 an hour right now to their employees.
Uh-huh.
So they have, and the place runs perfect. Like, have you ever seen them make a mistake?
No,
I've never had a mistake at
they're
In-N-Out,
well
ever.
oiled. It's crazy.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why is because they have a very simple menu, right? You can buy a burger, fries, and a shake. They don't sell chicken. They don't sell tacos. They don't sell all this other stuff. So you go to a four-way intersection, you see Jack in a Box, the usual cast of characters, Jack in a Box, Burger King, etc. And then you look over here and you see this massive line in and out
Yep.
and nobody in the drive-throughs, right? There's a reason for that.
Uh-huh.
It's a good company.
Yeah.
It's a very religious company. I don't agree with their politics, but on that side of it, in terms of it being run really well, I mean, holy smokes,
Yeah.
right? It's run incredibly well.
Yeah.
Um, then if you look at like the world of electronics and things like that, nobody can argue that Apple has reached a crescendo that nobody else has ever gotten to.
Right.
I mean, look at the stores they have. I mean, they are beautiful,
Yeah.
right? They're absolutely gorgeous. The products they have, the packaging they have, this even the service, it used to be rough, but they upgraded their service dramatically so you can talk to people, which was a breakthrough for them. Have you ever had a bad experience with Apple? I mean, do you keep buying Apple products? Like you have a phone, do you get the Apple TV? Do you get the Mac? Do you get the other stuff? Well, I mean, that tells you something, right? I mean, it's a really well-run company.
Yeah.
Um, I think that there are characteristics to really well companies that have to do with different stages in the life cycle, in the startup life cycle, specifically standardization and optimization.
Yeah.
Those two areas are missing from most life cycles. They usually go ideation or vision, right? And then your go-to-market strategy, and then they'll hop right to growth and they'll skip over standardization and they'll skip over optimization. What that means is that the problems that you had, they go with you if you don't solve them, and they get bigger until they kill you. And you realize those problems when you're in the standardization and optimization phases.
Yeah.
And most investors are like, you do go to market and it works. Now grow.
Yeah.
Now go crazy. And then all these big problems start expanding. You know what I mean? I think those are some of the key elements that I see. Like if you go to Apple and you have an experience with the documentation, the processing that they have for things is just incredible,
Yeah.
right? And if you watch In and Out operations and if you watch Costco's operations, you see the same thing, right? Well, you don't see that in failing companies,
Right.
right? You don't see that in companies that are just around because they've been around for a really, like if you go to a McDonald's or a Burger King or a Jack in a Box, you see underpaid people,
Hmm.
you see chaos, disorganization, and the stores range in quality substantially.
Yep.
That's not the same with these successful companies.
Yeah, for sure. So the one thing about my history of being a worker with bosses is there's always these fun moments that I remember about them that humanizes them. And it's a testament to who they are and their success. So my question to you is this. For everybody that you've ever known in a business sense, if you went through that room of people, swam to a podium, and could tell them one fun thing, one fun fact, one fun story about you that would humanize you and this book and your success as a businessman, what would you tell that room?
Every year since I was 18, I choose something that I think is impossible to do to prove to myself that I can do the impossible. So I have done things like wrestled a crocodile, bullfighting. I swam a marathon. I ran a marathon. I rode a bike 500 miles. I climbed El Capitan,
Wow.
Half Dome. I mean, I've done a ice, the luge thing that you go down the ice
Huh?
deal. I mean, I did a 30-day water fast where I only did water for 30 days. So I think that those things are probably the things that people are like, whoa, what the hell? Pretty unusual.
That's hardcore, but that's a testament to who you are. So the Startup Life Cycle is the latest book. If anybody wants to get a copy, they want to reach out, any of the good business in your world, where do they go?
They can go to Amazon or they can go to my website, GregoryShepard.com.
Okay. Gregory, it's so great to run into you again. We need to do this again. I love it. Every time I get off of an interview with you, I'm totally inspired. I understand that. I mean, you're a force in nature, man. So thank you. Thank you for taking a minute out.
Oh man, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This was a wonderful interview. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was my pleasure. Hello, friends. Joe Dimino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th
my street. You can also visit joedimino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.